Welcome, everybody. This is the Iowa City Public Library's Irving Weber Day program, or one of the Irving Weber Day programs for this year. In case you are unfamiliar with that, Irving Weber Days takes place in May, and May is National Historic Preservation Month. And the reason we celebrate Irving Weber, who was born in 1900 and lived into mid-1997, Irving Weber was himself instrumental in helping Iowa City preserve its history. He wrote more than 800 articles for the Iowa City Press Citizen, detailing what it was like to grow up in Iowa City. Things like the best places to buy penny candy and the joys of cooling off in Melrose Lake and the sledding parties on closed off streets. In recognition for all his work regarding local history, he was named Iowa City's official historian in 1989. We have a variety of his programs on the ICPL video stream or YouTube channel. And we have all of his books. He wrote, I believe, 7 books. Well, 7 books were compiled out of his newspaper columns. And we have an index to all of those at the library. So if you're curious about Irving Weber and his vision of Iowa City, come on down and check it out. Tonight, our guest is Tom Schulein, who has stepped in as Iowa City's unofficial historian and has even more entertaining stories than Irving personally, I think. But Tom has given lots of programs at the Senior Center and other places in Iowa City about local history. And he's here tonight with a brand new program. So you're seeing it for the first time. Tom, I'm going to let you take it from there.
Alrighty.
And welcome everybody, and thanks for coming.
And thank you, Beth. Very kind of you. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. I'm excited to present what I found out about the Irish family. It's the story of a distinguished family named Irish, a family with a presence in Iowa City from 1839 until the 1960s. The patriarch of the family is known to many of us as Captain Irish. A discussion of what brought him to Iowa City and how he acquired the moniker of Captain will follow. I've been told that the last name of Irish was once spelled de Iries and is thought to reflect on its origin in Ireland. This is from an Irish descendant who has learned this from one of the descendants of Captain Irish in a book. However, I also learned that the family was in England for many generations before coming to America in 1629. The Irish story includes the diverse occupations of whaling, machine shops, helping in the founding of Iowa City, farming, newspaper editorship and ownership, engineering, railroad surveying, teaching, business school ownership, and more. And our story begins in 1801 in the eastern United States. Frederick Macy Irish was one of 12 children born to Jonathan and Ruth Irish, born in Hudson, New York on March 13th of 1801. His father came from a strong seafaring background, extending back for generations. Jonathan's family name or home shortly after the close of the Revolutionary War was the island of Nantucket. And here's a quote: "Many on his mother's side of the family, the Macys, lived on Nantucket Island, the old whaling capital." And I'm told by a friend that that Macy name probably ties in with Macy's department store, but I don't know that for sure. Hoping to point his children in a different direction, Father Jonathan moved the family to De Ruyter in central New York State. But Frederick could not resist the urge to sail. And at the age of 17, he began to ply the oceans on a whaling boat out of Nantucket Island. The ship was similar to this one. He continued in that endeavor for several years. I think it was a 3-year stint, sailing around the tip of South America to reach San Francisco, the coasts of Oregon and Washington, and the Hawaiian Islands in 1820. One source related that Irish became a skilled navigator as well as an expert with the harpoon and lance. In fact, these are pictures of Irish's whaling tools, which at one time were on display in the Davenport Public Museum, but I think now are in a home in Iowa City. Commercial whaling in the United States dates to the 1600s in New England. And among the whale products was whale oil, a primary lubricant for machinery before the development of petroleum-based lubricants in the second half of the 19th century. Returning to New York, Irish decided not to go to sea again after meeting and marrying Elizabeth Ann Robinson in 1826. This is the only image I found for Elizabeth. Both Frederick and Elizabeth came from Quaker families. Frederick became a captain for the Dry Dock Company and piloted vessels entering and departing from the port of the city of New York, hence the name captain. It was well that he did not return to sea because the whaling ship he had served on went to the bottom of the sea off the shores of Magellan. Frederick and Elizabeth had a son who died in infancy and a daughter who died in childhood. Those are the first of many children. In 1834, a son, Charles Wood, was born, as seen on this family tree. It may be a little hard to make out the family tree, but that's about as big as I could make it to get it all on one screen when I get the whole tree developed. Frederick decided to leave New York, leaving his family there, and he moved to Terre Haute, Indiana. This is a later picture of Terre Haute, but a kind of an early one. And he established a foundry and a machine shop there. His family rejoined him while he was there. And in 1837, another son, Gilbert, was born. I'll give you details on Gilbert after I get through the little litany here about Captain. Learning about the new territory of Iowa, Frederick again sent his family back east to their family home and set out on horseback, traveling national roads and Indian trails, quote unquote, to reach the Mississippi River in 1838. And after finding out about the new capital city to be Iowa City, he joined with Chauncey Swan, who was one of the three commissioners who were appointed to select the site for the capital. So on May 1st of 1839, they arrived at Napoleon, which is a small settlement on the south edge of present-day Iowa City. After constructing a cabin on a claim he made, Irish sent for his wife and family. The cabin site is shown here, and of course it was then outside the city limits. Now today, it shows up as being on Cedar Street, just east of Reno Park, over on the almost the edge of Hickory Hill Park. Irish bought about 30 acres of adjoining land. This would be the approximate area of his property. The first session of the Johnson County Commissioners was held at the cabin of Captain Irish. Quote, when those lawmakers changed their meeting place to Iowa City, even before this city has proclaimed to be the seat of government of either county or territory. Irish also built Leanback Hall, which he named as such. In his words, quote, an establishment known as Leanback Hall, which was built in a few days and contained bar, dining and lodging rooms, and kitchen. The bedroom contained one bunk, which accommodated 36 men and was a regular couch at that on a regulation bedstead. The above number has reposed in it many a night, and no complaint was ever entered against it. That's the end of his quote. Another source described the bedding as about a foot-thick layer of brush with new mown grass upon that and blankets and pillows. Those who didn't fit on the bed had to sleep, quote, leaning back against the wall. This hotel accommodated land buyers on the first day that lots were auctioned off in Iowa City. We think Leanback Hall was located in the vicinity of today's senior center. Irish assisted Robert Lucas, governor of the Iowa Territory, and he helped locate the territorial capital of Iowa City. Irish designed a rig to sling large stones and transport them to the building site of the Capitol. In 1841, Irish bought 4 lots in Iowa City, making him one of the first to purchase lots in the new city. And when the first steamboat to arrive at Iowa City, the Ripple, came up the Iowa River and landed here in June of 1841, Captain Irish accompanied, quote, the boat down the river to ascertain the principal obstructions to navigation and the probable expense of removing them. Captain Irish spoke highly of John Gilbert, who was possibly the first white settler in Johnson County, calling him kind and hospitable. When Frederick Irish's log cabin became unsuitable for his family, he built this home in 1849. The home is referred to as Rose Hill, and his entire acreage was also referred to as Rose Hill. Irving Weber said the name was ascribed because of the profusion of wild roses that once grew on the hill. This is an 1889 view of Rose Hill, and the architectural style is known as Greek Revival. Irish served on a committee of local citizens concerned with bringing the railroads west of the Mississippi River, and he and Governor Robert Lucas were appointed to a committee charged with petitioning Congress for land grants for the railroads. There's a long story concerning Rose Hill up to its sale in the 1960s, when the Irish ownership came to an end. I'm jumping now to April of 1964, when hundreds of people gathered for the auction that took place at Rose Hill. In September of 1964, a group of over 120 persons met in the city council chambers for an informational meeting on Rose Hill. By the way, if I didn't say it, Rose Hill is on Davenport Street, which is almost to the east end of Davenport Street. So it's very close to Hickory Hill Park. Almost all of the people were in favor of the city buying the property and developing it into a park. However, the city council announced that it had reached an informal decision to give way to Mercy Hospital for them to buy the property and construct a new hospital there. And if they did, Mercy then might convert its existing hospital into a convalescent center. Well, Mercy, of course, did not buy the property and build, but Iowa City bought 17.5 acres of it with the intention of developing it into a park, leaving 11 acres available for something else. The city would have bought all 30 acres, but the council decided it would be too large of an outlay of money, and they cut the purchase about in half. The sale of the 17.5 acres left an 11-acre horseshoe-shaped area available for a new subdivision. The developers chose the very appropriate name of Rose Hill. Here's a simplified plat for the new development, which was divided into 38 lots, one of which included the 1849 Rose Hill house shown here in red. The house was slated for demolition. The developer who purchased the land indicated it would be way too much work to be able to fix it up. The house was almost covered with trees and underbrush. The new owner said it would be real nice to save it, but like I said, just a terrific amount of money to restore it. Well, fortunately, I think the home was not demolished, but sold, and it has been restored to, as we see it here. It has the address of 1415 Davenport Street, and tradition holds that the home may have been on the Underground Railroad. Here's the front of the home. It was owned, I believe, from the mid to late 1960s to quite recently by one family. So it came under their ownership for quite a long time. And a new party has now come in for, maybe three years or so. So what happened to the log cabin residence that I showed you near Reno Park that Irish built first? We think it was actually incorporated into this home, which was probably built in the 1800s, possibly in the 1860s started. Irving Weber described the log cabin as 16 by 26 feet, and it is believed that the cabin essentially became the dining room of this house, with the logs visible from the basement. I would love to be able to get in there. In fact, one of my former dental patients owns the house, and so maybe I could someday pay it a visit. This home is located on a large property at 1310 Cedar Street, not far from the 1849 brick Irish residence. Frederick Macy Irish, who liked to be called Captain, was described as a huge man with a booming voice. In about 1855, a sudden attack of neuralgia, as it was described, left him totally blind, a condition he was in for the last 20 years of his life. In 1868, Irish offered the first history of Johnson County through writings in 4 articles in the Annals of Iowa. He farmed during his entire time in Iowa City. He remained in great demand as a public speaker. He was fond of recounting tales of his days on the high seas while whaling. He was charitable to the last degree, often helping the old, indigent, and blind in Iowa City. Near the end of his life, he prodigiously sought the procurement of a pension for an aged and helpless citizen, a Mr. Conrad, not shown here, but Conrad was an Iowa Greybeard, like this man, a Greybeard soldier during the Civil War. The 37th Iowa Infantry was nicknamed the Greybeard Regiment because it was composed of men at least 45 years of age, those not liable for military service. The regiment spent most of its service guarding prisoner of war camps and supply trains. And it was created for political reasons as a way of proving that men well above normal military age were willing to volunteer. A few of its members were in their 70s. At least 38 were from Iowa City. Captain Irish met an untimely death, although he was 75 or so, in February of 1875 from an accident. It was on Dubuque Street in Iowa City when his sleigh, being driven by his trusted young driver, collided with another horse-drawn conveyance. In 1999, Captain Irish was honored with the naming of the road east of North Dodge Street, just a little bit south of Interstate 80, as Captain Irish Parkway. Some of you perhaps remember the sign was even put in place. However, when Scott Boulevard was linked up to Captain Irish Parkway, when the First Avenue extension was completed, Captain Irish Parkway became Scott Boulevard. So Captain Irish lost this attribution. And I'm not sure that we have any other attribution for Captain Irish. Now I'd like to talk about his children and grandchildren. Charles, the third but first child to survive into adulthood, was born in New York when they were still there in 1834. His journey to Iowa took him by rail, water, canal, stagecoach, steamboat on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and finally by stagecoach to Iowa City. He was called Charlie, and he did all of his study at home and worked under 2 engineers in the field to become a civil engineer. And here's Charles on the family tree. When only about 18, Charles worked for 2 years or more on the failed Lyons, Iowa Central Railroad, the so-called Calico Railroad, that was to cut through Iowa City in the region of Brown Street. I've circled with a big oval red, and you can see the railroad line coming through about the middle of the red there. The railroad cut was made, a lot of grading was done on it, but it failed. Charles started as an axeman and later became assistant engineer. The railroad failed, we think, after officials absconded with the funds, and the workers weren't being paid and were said to be compensated in cloth, hence the derisive name of the Calico Railroad. Later, Charles did surveying in Johnson County, and he taught in the public schools of Johnson County. He moved to Tama County, Iowa, where he worked as a school teacher, land surveyor, and county surveyor. He continued to do railroad work and returned to Iowa City in 1866 when he worked on other railroad projects. He was also city engineer in Iowa City and planned drainage for principal streets and laid macadam on many streets. It's like a crushed rock. I believe he also superintended the building of the Iowa Avenue Centennial Bridge over the Iowa River, so named because it was built in 1876 from the USA's centennial. Charles continued with railroad work in various states until 1882. In 1883, he organized the Iowa Society of Civil Engineers. And in 1886, President Grover Cleveland appointed him to be Surveyor General of the state of Nevada, thus lending the title of General to Charles Irish. In 1893, President Cleveland called him to Washington, D.C. to the head of the Bureau of Irrigation. Charles was also widely known as an astronomer and botanist. His observations of the total eclipse of the sun in 1869 at Iowa City in Nevada in 1889 resulted in international recognition. And he also built the Grand Canyon and Royal Gorge bridges. Charles died in 1904 while in Nevada. In 1977, two paintings were found that created excitement at the Iowa State Historical Society. They were oil portraits of Charles Irish and his wife, Susanna Abigail Yarborough Irish, done by Isaac Weatherby, who was a well-known 19th century Iowa City painter and photographer. Our next child, Gilbert Irish, was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, and after moving to Iowa City as a small boy in 1840, he received his first 10 years of education from his mother. Gilbert said, quote, "Since the age of 18, first and always a farmer," referring to his occupation. From the late 1850s to 1863, he taught school in Peoria, Illinois, and after returning to Iowa City, he was elected to the school board of Lucas Township and held the position of secretary of the board for many years. He was also justice of the peace for Johnson County for 35 years. He married in 1879 and lived at Rose Hill. He and his wife lent their care and skills to Rose Hill by planting trees, shrubs, and flowers, perhaps lending the name of Rose Hill to the property. Gilbert also said, quote, "The only important thing in my life is that I've always been a Democrat in politics and have never been a member of any church, society, or club," end of quote. Gilbert's reputation and legacy was that he was a moral, uprighteous man who displayed great integrity. And Gilbert's lengthy newspaper articles on early Johnson County history inspired the writings of Ray Orner's Leading Events in Johnson County, published in 1912 and 1913. Gilbert wrote 65 historical articles on Johnson County, which were published in the Iowa Citizen in the early 1900s. And for a long time, Gilbert Irish was connected with the Old Settlers Association, formed in about 1856, acting as secretary for many years. The association was formed by some of the pioneers in Johnson County as a volunteer organization that held annual picnics with programs of speeches that related to the early settlement and development of the county. And I think the Old Settlers discontinued their meetings in 1970. Upon Gilbert's death in 1911, he was acknowledged as perhaps the best living authority on the history of Johnson County. Also, Gilbert was lauded for being, quote, "ever ready to lend a helping hand to those in need, and was generous even to depriving himself of many of the comforts of life." Here's a photo of Gilbert Irish harvesting rye the old-fashioned way. One of the two gentlemen up there. Thomas Irish was born in 1841 at Rose Hill. Here he is on the family tree, the third surviving child of Frederick and Elizabeth. I found no picture of Thomas. Thomas assisted in organizing the public schools and was one of the first superintendents in Iowa City, if not the first. But Dubuque lured him away by substantially increasing his salary, and he later attained statewide eminence in the field of school supervision. He was known as Professor Irish and taught for more than 50 years in Dubuque. He died while at the home of his son in California at the age of 94. John Powell Irish, the next child, was born in 1843. Over his lifetime, he was an editor, newspaper owner, attorney, educator, farmer, lawmaker, humanitarian, and official. While only in his 20s, he became the editor of the Iowa State Press, a precursor of the Iowa City Press Citizen. He later owned the newspaper. He taught grammar school and became a member of the Iowa Board of Trustees, later known as the Board of Regents. In 1858, John, aged 15, while barefoot, accompanied his blind father and over a dozen other men who took the law into their own hands. A man named Boyd Wilkinson was under indictment for stealing some carpeting from the Park Hotel and was in the process of harassing a Philip Clark by beating him, shooting his cabin full of holes, and setting his barn on fire. The group of men, which included John and his father, confronted Wilkinson, who would not own up to what he did. So they took Wilkinson to the Iowa River, where they apparently threatened to hang him. Upon getting to the river, Wilkinson, with his hands tied behind his back, either jumped from the wagon and dove into the river or was thrown in, after which there was no attempt to save him and he drowned. Many of the men fled town, but Captain Irish was among the indicted and his trial was moved to Scott County. Irish was acquitted and only one of the indicted men served a prison term. Irving Weber considered this to be the only one blot on Captain Irish's long career in Iowa City. John was a founder, promoter, and officer of orphans' homes, homes for the blind, and other institutions. He was an exceptional debater and speaker. He helped establish the medical school at the university in 1870. And he also had a big influence on the establishment of the law department. When the University of Iowa Medical School was but 3 months old, there was trouble getting enough cadavers for anatomy class. So a janitor and 2 students stole one from Oakland Cemetery. John P. Irish had the 2 students carry the body to a secure place and arranged a deal with the family that if the body would be returned, no charges would be filed. No indictments were returned, even though dissection of the body had already begun. John served in 3 general assemblies as an Iowa State representative and was a candidate for governor in 1877. After that, he left Iowa City for California, where he immediately became editor of the Alta California newspaper and later editor and principal owner of the Oakland Times. Also while in California, President Grover Cleveland appointed John naval officer of the Port of San Francisco, after which he became known as Colonel Irish. So we had a captain, a general, and a Colonel Irish. John was a Democrat and Theodore Roosevelt was a Republican. Yet when Roosevelt's fellow Republicans came to him urging that Irish should be removed from office, Roosevelt said, quote, "If democracy makes an official like John P. Irish, give me more Democrats." John Irish died from injuries received when he was struck by a streetcar. Ruth Irish was the 7th and last child of Captain Irish and was born in 1849. This was one of 2 photographs that I found of Ruth. Here is Ruth in the family tree. And here's a photo taken from her 1938 obituary. She died suddenly at home at Rose Hill at the age of 88, while living there with her niece, Jane Irish, and more about Jane in a moment. Her obituary held no record of the work she was engaged in during her lifetime, so I found out very little about Ruth. And now we're going to move to the grandchildren. Elizabeth Irish, known as Lizzie, was born on February 22nd of 1856 to Charles and Susanna Irish. Here's Elizabeth's place on the family tree, the first child of Charles, first of 2 daughters. She attended St. Agatha Seminary, which was housed in the original Park House building on the northwest corner of Dubuque and Jefferson Streets. Lizzie was chosen as the most popular young lady in Iowa City and Johnson County in a fundraiser contest sponsored by St. Patrick's Church in 1877. She then enrolled in the Iowa City Commercial College, founded in 1865 to study bookkeeping. After her schooling, Elizabeth was employed by her uncle John Irish as a cashier, bookkeeper, and collector in his newspaper office. She was the first woman to hold a secretarial position in Iowa City and Johnson County. After Uncle John moved to California, She accompanied him there where she found employment in a post office and at the U.S. Mint in San Francisco. And when Elizabeth's father, Charles, became Surveyor General of Nevada, Elizabeth moved to Reno to become chief clerk in his office. Elizabeth apparently had quite a high standard for matrimony and rejected a proposal of a young man by replying, quote, "'Tis leap year. I stand a better opportunity. Ha ha." She returned to Iowa City at the age of 39 and used her background in business schooling and a desire to train young people in business fundamentals to found the Irish Business College in 1895. She made her home at 132 North Dodge Street. And by 1895, some 20 business schools existed throughout the state of Iowa to train young men and women. The Irish School was mainly for the study of typing and shorthand, and it widened working opportunities for women. The school included a commercial department, preparatory department, and a department of shorthand and typewriting. By 1903, Elizabeth had changed the name of her school to Irish's University Business College, implying a connection with the University of Iowa, probably as a public relations act. With 4 instructors, the school taught a full business course, including business office practice, commercial law, banking, bookkeeping, penmanship, shorthand, and typing. Elizabeth also operated a placement service for her graduates. And when Elizabeth was out of town, her cousin Jane was in charge of the college. A series of letters were found written in Pitman shorthand from Jane to Elizabeth. The shorthand allowed the cousins to comment freely on people and events without other family members thus able to read the letters. Some very personal and outspoken details not ordinarily found in women's diaries of the day were found. For a time, the Irish Business College had at least one competitor in Iowa City, the Iowa City Commercial College, which operated until 1912. But after that, for 2 decades, the Irish school had no competition. In the first part of the 20th century, the Irish school was booming with 6 instructors and 166 students. A business school offered a young woman, especially, a cheaper course of study than a college degree and a more practical preparation for the workplace. The Irish graduates were highly esteemed by those who employed them. Elizabeth said her motto was work and work and work and work. She wore her hair in a bun. She had a rather abrupt and businesslike manner, was nice, but strict, and one of her students said if her expectations were not met, quote, she could dress you down like nobody's business. Elizabeth operated her school until she retired in late 1940 at the age of 84. She then closed the school. Elizabeth educated an estimated 12,000 persons during the 45 years she ran her school. And after the school closed, only the Brown's Business Institute was left. The successor to this school, the Iowa City Business College, closed in 1969. And while small private business schools continued to operate up to around 1970, quote, it was the advent of junior colleges that finally killed off most of the small private business schools in Iowa. From 1895 to 1940, Elizabeth Irish was the only woman member of the Iowa City Commercial Club, which was a forerunner of the Chamber of Commerce. She died on March 11th, 1952, at the age of 96. Ruth Irish was the second daughter of Charles Wood Irish. She was born in 1859. Ruth was the younger sister of Elizabeth, therefore. She spent her first 4 years in a log cabin in a clearing on the reservation of the Sac and Fox Indians, where her father was working in Tama County, Iowa. She attended St. Agatha Seminary in Iowa City and also a place called McLean's Academy. A favorite recollection of Ruth's childhood was the time she was called from an Iowa City audience to the stage, where General Tom Thumb and his wife were appearing. in order to show the comparison in height of a normal child and the midget troop. At age 16, she became a teacher, first in Coralville, and then in the 3rd Ward building in Iowa City, 3rd Ward school building. She had as many as 135 pupils in her room, with some of them sitting on the floor. And at age 19, she became principal of the 3rd Ward school and held that position for 7 years. The school was built in 1856 and was located near Mann School and the Prussel School in the adjacent park area of today. And these ward schools were replaced in 1918 by the Mann School, Sabin School, Longfellow School, and one relatively unknown to most of us called the Kellogg School, which was on the site of the present VA hospital. In the summer of 1880, Ruth accompanied her father to the Indian frontier in the Dakotas, where he was surveying for a railroad. The Indian chiefs considered Charles a friend. Ruth encountered lots of colorful characters, she reminisced, such as Calamity Jane and Buffalo Bill Cody. And she took painting lessons from Isaac Weatherby, photographer of the earliest scenes in Iowa City. She was an active Unitarian and wrote articles on Iowa Unitarian church history and local history. After Ruth resigned as head of the 3rd Ward School in 1886, she taught watercolor classes in her home for a year while studying botany at the University of Iowa under Bohumil Shimmick. The next year, she married Dr. Charles Preston, an Iowa Citian who graduated from medical school, and they resided in Davenport. There, she was active in the women's suffrage movement. Ruth and Dr. Preston had 3 children together. Jane Terrell Irish was the only child of Gilbert Irish and was born on June 3rd, 1881. In this photograph, she was about 8 years old. Jane was educated in public and commercial schools and became an expert stenographer. She also became an expert in what was known as Pitman shorthand and served as an instructor at the Irish Business College that was run by her cousin Elizabeth. Jane also worked as a stenographer for various businesses in Iowa City until the 1940s or later, including at the courthouse and at an abstract company. She also reportedly wrote a county history. Jane lived at Rose Hill her entire 81 years. She raised leghorn chickens and mammoth Peking ducks. Jane was trapped in her house on November 22nd, 1950, when fire broke out. She was rescued uninjured, but the home was badly damaged. The fire may have been started by a kerosene lamp because the home had no electricity and several lamps were burning when the firemen arrived. A friend of mine recounted playing on Jane's acreage when he was a kid and remembers her chasing him away. In 1963, Jane was found dead on her property from an apparent heart attack, and the entire 30 acres of property came up for sale in 1964, which I had discussed previously. After the home was left vacant, it was broken into and ransacked. Here's the home in 1964, shortly after Jane died. You can get some idea of its state of disrepair. So with the death of Jane Irish and the passing of Rose Hill to new owners, the 125-year history of the Irish family in Iowa City came to a close. So what do we know of the Irish name in Iowa City today? I can't answer that completely. I don't know if any of the direct descendants of Captain Irish are still here, but the Irish name is found in the Iowa City telephone directory. And a current University of Iowa professor who has the last name Irish moved here from out of state. And she told me she is a distant relative of Captain Irish. So in summary, collectively, the Irish family had a profound influence on Iowa City. Their presence ranged from the very founding of the city to well into the 20th century. Many of us were familiar with the name Captain Irish, born Frederick Macy Irish, but I hope this presentation has also enlightened you as to the contributions of his children and grandchildren, ones that impacted the development of Iowa City in significant ways. Thank you.
Well,
And
Tom,
we have,
I have to say, was it Elizabeth who had the business school or Ruth?
yeah, yes,
It was Elizabeth. Considering her impact on the women in Iowa City, I wish we knew more about her story.
yes,
Because, I mean, think about how many years that school was open and how many women were able to make a living after going through her school.
right, that's right.
It was just amazing. It
Yep,
makes me want to go find out more information about her.
I would love to. And this is what I've uncovered so far. I've got some 54 references, but there's probably a lot more to be found. Just like with anything in history, it's a continuation of study.
Exactly. Well, and I want to see if I can track down the history of Johnson County by Jane Irish. Do you know, have you ever seen a copy of it?
I have not. I only found that one reference that indicated that she may have written something.
Okay. Well, I'll scope it out in interlibrary loan and maybe talk to the State Historical Society to see if they know of it, or
Yes,
maybe something that she ended up as a co-author of or something.
that'd be great. The home, which is now owned by another party, I've spoken with the lady who owns it, and she has a lot of the artifacts of the family, including, she thinks, that harpoon and that lance that I showed you early in the presentation. And she has a lot of documents, maybe some old family photos that haven't even been published. But she seemed to indicate that she might entertain me and Vivian coming over for a tour sometime, which would be fascinating.
Well, Tom, if you can talk her into it, I could swing having a display of some of them at the library, if you can get her to agree to it, or maybe even get her to agree to loan them to us, the newspapers and photographs, and we could digitize them and add them to the local history collection, so that, or the digital history collection, so that they're available.
That'd be great.
That sounds fascinating.
Yes.
So were there any other questions out there? You're all muted, so if you've got a question, unmute yourself and then you can ask. Well, so Tom, what is your next program that you're working on, or do you have you created one yet?
Nothing scheduled. I hope to return to the senior center live, perhaps in the fall. We don't know, of course. I'm working on some new topics. I'm exploring the history of the Coralville Dam and Reservoir and Lake McBride Dam and the lake. Also, it slipped my mind already. Oh, goodness. I've got a couple of topics that I've been working on, sort of works in progress.
Yes. Well, for those of you who are interested, a lot of Tom, well, all of Tom's programs that he's given at the library are digitized and are on the library's, either our YouTube channel, which is Iowa City Public Library, or on the video stream through the library, which is icpl.org video. Then go to the local history section and you'll find Irving Weber programs, you'll find Tom Schulein programs, and a few other random things. Richard, you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
Just wanted to ask Tom where he found pictures of like Elizabeth, Ruth, and Jane. I would think that would be tricky to find. What's your source?
The one of Jane I found, and I enlarged it greatly from scanning a picture. I don't give sources because I'm not publishing things, but I'm certainly always wanting to acknowledge sources. But this was from the pictorial, let's see, who wrote that book? Mansheim's book on Iowa City history. And that's where I found a few of the other pictures on some of the boys. And the other, I found an article, I can't remember who published it. It might have been palimpsest, but it was just in some other places. Obviously other places, but I can't put my finger on it right now.
You're quite a detective.
Well, that's the idea, I guess. It's good to be a detective. Yes, that's a good word for it.
That's good. And one of the fun things about, at least for me, reading, I'm not so much into history like history textbooks, but when I hear of a person like Elizabeth Irish and it sparks curiosity, being a reference librarian, the first thing I'll do is start researching. And I have friends who accuse me of being a stalker because I get so in depth at researching people. But I mean, that's what the internet is all about. So,
Right. We'll see,
and Tom, if I find anything good, I will let you know.
Okay, I was gonna mention a few of the references here I could bring up.
Sure.
And see, Richard, let's see, where is let me find it here. Coming up within a couple seconds here. Let's see. That article, there was quite a nice article on Elizabeth Business School and tying it into other business schools in Iowa. There was one thing in the Iowa Magazine. It was by a lady named Ruth Bites, the old sailor from Rose Hill in 1967. Iowa Heritage Illustrated in 1998 had the story of Miss Elizabeth Irish University Business College by an Ann Beiser Allen. And the old sailor.
What was the name of the journal?
The
Iowa.
That was the, let's see, where is it? Iowa Heritage Illustrated.
Thank you.
In winter 1998, pages 173 to 85. And there's also, Beth, there's a Joyce, let's see, man, I can send you all of my references if you want to. And this is something that's a collection, the Irish Preston papers. Irish Preston, yeah, that would be.
Or Preston Irish.
Preston Irish, yes.
Right.
Yeah, I just got it listed as Irish Preston papers.
Tell me, who was Preston Irish? Was that his father or his brother? Do you remember?
I don't. I have to look. Here we go.
Him being one of 10 some odd children.
Yeah, there were 5 children of Captain, 2 of 7, I mean, 2 of whom died early, 1 in infancy, 1 in early childhood. The 5 remaining, and Preston. Oh, Preston, that was the man married by Ruth, was it not? Ruth Irish Preston.
Oh, that was her married
Her
name.
husband, the physician.
Okay, the physician, right? Okay,
right. And the lady who is Irish is Erin, E-R. I don't think she'd mind my saying her name. Erin Irish, who is an associate professor of biology, and she, I think, learned later that Captain Irish was either a distant relative or that he was here in Iowa City. She moved from elsewhere to become a professor here. But the last name of Irish kind of fascinates me as to.
Have you researched him on ancestry.com or familysearch.com to see if you could find an extended family tree that someone else had done?
You mean of Captain?
Yeah, Captain or even Captain's parents.
No, I haven't.
That could be interesting too.
Yes.
Well, I thank you so much for doing this, Tom. I have to admit, my favorite program you've ever done is still the history of the grocery stores in Iowa City. That is my favorite program.
I'm glad you like it.
I am from an era when there were mega grocery stores. There weren't
Yes.
little tiny corner stores. And to hear about all the different corner stores, if you haven't watched that program, it too is on the library's YouTube channel or our video stream, icpl.org/video. But thank you so much for all of you for coming.
Yes. And thank
Again,
you,
this
Beth.
one will, after we edit it, it will get put up on the stream. So if you know of anybody who didn't get to see it, or anyone you'd want to see it, let them know. And hopefully, oh yeah, there are chats coming up. Thank you, Tom. It was very nice introduction to the Irish family. And thanks, Tom, for another interesting program.
Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. And
thank
as
you,
soon
Beth.
as soon as you have another one ready, you know where we are.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah,
Thank you.
all. Thanks, Beth.